Welcome to the State Procurement Office's workshop number SPO 215, the request for proposals process for health and human services pursuant to HRS Chapter 103F. This workshop will provide an overview of the competitive purchase of services procurement process. The RFP process will be covered in this and two other workshops, workshop number 220, evaluating proposals, and workshop number 225, getting from the notice of award to executed contract. In this workshop, we'll be going over the RFP template. So if you have not already done so, and to make it easier for you to follow along, stop here and print out the RFP template before continuing on with this workshop. You'll only need to print out the regular RFP template. We covered 4 of the 5 methods of procurement of health and human services in workshop number SPO 210. Today, we're covering the competitive purchase of services, which is the method used most often for procurements of health and human services. And the process which it is done is through the request for proposals process. So what is an RFP? It's not a bid or a method of procurement. It's a mechanism or process and not just a document. The RFP process is the competitive procurement method for soliciting providers to submit a detailed plan to provide health or human services to the public on behalf of a state agency. It's the most competitive of all the procurement methods for 103F. The RFP process is the vehicle by which we receive proposals. The proposals are evaluated and the result is contracted services. When you are doing any kind of procurement, planning plays an important role in the whole process. If you forgot what goes into planning, as a quick refresher, watch workshop number 205. As part of the procurement planning, you need to form a team to work together. Your supervisor or administrator can help identify team members. Remember that putting together the RFP is a team process. Decide who will be team members. Get your evaluators while you're in the planning process. Except for the coordinator, who is involved from the beginning to end, team members may not all be involved in every aspect of the process. Provide your team members with drafts and invite comments. Developing a well-written RFP takes time and planning. As a reminder, planning is covered in the HAR Chapter 3-142. Remember, planning is mandatory, but it's a good thing. The more time you spend on putting together the procurement, the better your results will be. In the RFP template, a brief summary of your agency's planning activity for the services needs to be inputted. Planning documents referenced in the RFP are public documents. People change, conditions change, amount of funding changes, your knowledge changes. So your RFP. So what goes into planning for an RFP? First, you need to spend time to determine what it is that you need to accomplish and why it matters. You need to be clear as to what issues you are facing. Why do you need the services? What problems are you trying to resolve? Is there something you wish to achieve or something you need to change? What's your purpose in taking action? Will it alleviate the problem? When should you start? Is now the right time? Are circumstances favorable enough? Would it be better to wait and see how events turn out? Are you in danger of rushing into short-term action when a long-term approach is needed? Where should you begin? Which aspect of the problem or change should you tackle first? Is it the most important or the most pressing? Since these typically refer to two aspects of any problem, not one. How should you do it? What's the best approach? What skills or techniques will you need? What can you learn from others' experiences to assist you? Decide on who will be responsible for this procurement. Who will be on the team to put together the procurement and manage the contract? Who do you need on your side? Who has to help you if you want the procurement to succeed? After all that, then you can decide the who, what, when, where, why, and how of the services. Think carefully. Put them into some order of priority. Don't assume that you'll be able to tackle it all at once because it's likely to be more than you can handle. And remember that planning takes time. Some service questions that you will need to ponder. Who is your target population? What is your budget? What outcomes are you looking to achieve? What kind of services and facilities, if applicable, are needed to achieve the outcomes? What type of provider are you looking to provide the services? What are the provider responsibilities? What are the state's responsibilities? What do you want the provider to do? What are the qualification requirements for the services providers and provider staff? What are the service delivery timelines, if any? What are the reporting requirements of the provider? What do you want applicants to address in the proposal submitted? What are the evaluation factors that are important to look at in the proposal? Based on that, establish the criteria for evaluating submitted proposals. When do you want the services to begin and end? Is it going to be 1 year a contract with multiple extensions? Where are the services going to take place? Are the services for only one or multiple islands or geographic areas? And how will the provider's services be monitored? How many awards will be made? How will payments be made? How will referrals be made? You need to provide as much information as you possibly can so that the providers can prepare a responsive proposal. Don't let it be a guessing game for the providers. Put yourself in the provider's shoes for the moment. Is the information in the RFP enough for the providers to put together a clear, concise, and sound proposal that satisfies their purchasing agency's requirements? As part of your planning, you need to allow adequate time for the entire procurement process. These are things for you to consider. If it's a new, complex, or greatly modified services, you need to allot more time for planning. A request for information and an orientation meeting is a requirement. Anticipate questions, which may mean possibly revising specifications or issuing another RFI. Possible changes to the specs result in issuing addenda, which possibly could change the proposal submittal deadline. Provide adequate time for providers to prepare their proposals depending on the complexity of the services. Allot time for evaluation of proposals received. How many proposals do you anticipate receiving? Are there a number of providers that can provide the required services? Is the service one which could possibly have a protest? Remember, once a notice of protest is received, the procurement comes to a halt until the protest is resolved. Provide time to develop the contract. Allow time for the provider to execute the contract. Consider where the provider is located and the process that their organization goes through to get a contract signed. Also, consider the time that it takes for your department and the Attorney General's office to approve the contract. Although the average length of time is 6 to 9 months for the procurement process, it's never too early to start a year or more in advance of commencing the services. Request for information is covered under HAR Section 3-142-202. It's a requirement to issue an RFI during the planning process. Depending on the services, if it will help you to develop your RFP, you may want to issue more than one RFI. HAR Section 3-142-202B provides some permissible RFI subject areas. When should you do an RFI during the planning process? No specific timeline is given. It could be any time prior to issuing the RFP. It really depends what you're asking for. Give providers time to respond and give yourself time to review and summarize the responses and provide feedback to the providers who responded. It can't be emphasized enough that you need to start early because you'll never know what obstacles you'll encounter along the way. The RFI needs to be published on the Internet for a minimum of 7 days. For the executive branch, the RFI needs to be posted onto the procurement notices system website. Provide more time for the providers to respond if you're asking for put on your thinking cap kind of question. The due date for responses to the RFI should not be considered a drop-dead deadline. Allow responses even though the deadline has passed because it can only help your solicitation development. There are two RFP templates available for your solicitations, the regular RFP template and the short form RFP template. Be sure to check the SPO website for the most current version. Let's briefly talk about the short form RFP template first. The short form template would be used when the service activities and method of delivery are clearly set or are industry standards. There's very little or nothing for the applicant to propose other than meeting minimum qualifications and offering a competitive price. Evaluations and award is based on qualifications and pricing. These are some of the services that would fit the short form RFP. Physician services, nursing, dentistry, occupational physical therapy, psychiatric psychological assessments. Now remember, do not try to use the short form if it doesn't fit. If you don't have time to do it right the first time, you'll have to make time to do it over. Now let's look at the regular form RFP template because this is the one that you will be using most often. Again, it'll be easier if you have a copy of the RFP template to follow along. If you haven't already, stop here and print out a copy. The RFP process is used when a purchasing agency has specific outcomes or goals that they need or want to achieve and may not necessarily know how to achieve it, or they want the applicants to propose the best way to achieve the outcomes. So parameters and requirements are established in the RFP, and the applicants responding to RFP will propose the steps or program to get to the end result. So in order to evaluate the proposals received fairly, it's important for the purchasing agency to establish what the applicant needs to include in the proposal and to have established criteria to evaluate what is proposed. Now let's look at the RFP template itself. Anything that you see in red are guidelines for you to use as you develop the RFP. Don't forget to delete the guidelines as you are done with each section. The sample notice page gives the reader a quick glimpse of the services and important dates. The proposal, mail-in, and delivery information sheet provides proposal submittal information, the number of proposal copies, and the mail or hand delivery addresses and point of contact. Next, we have the table of contents. Both RFP templates, short and regular, are divided into 5 sections. Section 1 is the administrative overview, which has general information. Section 2 is where the user agency describes what is expected of the provider awarded a contract. Section 3 is where the user agency tells the prospective applicant all that is to be included in the submittal proposal. Section 4 explains how the proposal will be evaluated and the criteria by which the proposals will be evaluated. Section 5 is where the agency places attachments as applicable to the solicitation. Let's look at each section a little more closely. The information which is in Section 1 is required to be in the RFP per the administrative rules, and there are other standard information which applies to all RFPs. So that being said, you should not delete any of the provisions in this section. You may add, but don't delete. If a provision does not apply to your solicitation, then mark it as such. This section also has areas where you will need to fill in. We will go over those in a little while. You will need to provide dates on the procurement timetable. Fill in all the dates. For items marked optional, don't leave blank or put not applicable because when you do, you are closing the door to that option. There are a variety of ways that you could put in the dates. It could be a specific day or a period of time, or you might want to give yourself a month to perform the task. For optional items, if you're not sure if you'll be exercising the option, put to be determined. Don't leave it blank. There are 23 subsections in Section 1. Most are self-explanatory. Aside from the procurement table, what else do you need to complete in Section 1? You need to indicate under 1.5 contracting office information, 1.6 RFP point of contact, 1.7 the date, time, and location of the orientation meeting, 1.8 the due date and time for submission of questions, 1.17 provider participation in planning, and 1.20 point of contact information for protest. I'll talk a little bit about the provider participation planning when we get to slide 46. The orientation meeting should be 5 to 15 working days after the public notice is issued, or you need to give the applicants enough time to become familiar with the RFP and its requirements before the meeting. If the contracted services are to be performed on multiple islands, then in accordance with HAR Section 3-143-203, the orientation shall be held at a minimum on the island where the largest share of the services will be provided. In this day and age, there are many ways that you can hold a meeting in one location, but also include participation by providers on other islands by teleconferencing, phone conferencing, and other electronic media. Subsection 1.22 references general and special conditions. The general conditions are the Department of the Attorney General's general conditions. The general conditions can be found on Form Central, which is located at hawaii.gov/forms. Click on Internal Forms. Look for Form AG-103 F13. Review all of the conditions. If a condition does not seem appropriate for a particular service, please discuss it with your Deputy AG. If there are other special conditions or terms of a general nature that is specific to your services and you would like to include it in your RFP, again, please check and discuss with your Deputy AG. Section 2 follows HAR Section 3-143-302, Service Specifications for Request for Proposals. In this section, you are telling the prospective providers what services are required of the contracted provider and what type of pricing or pricing methodology will be utilized. Section 2 is the heart of the RFP, and in order to convey what it is that the provider needs to do, you yourself need to know what services you want provided. If the service specifications are not clearly defined or the provider expectations are not clear, then don't be surprised when you receive vague proposals that are not in line with what you had intended. As you can see in this slide, the word provider is underlined and in bold print and capitalized. The reason for this is many times purchasing agencies get a little fuzzy about what belongs in Section 2 and what belongs in Section 3. In Section 2, you will be including only those services or taskings that you want the contracted provider to do. Don't include anything that you want the applicant to include in the proposal. Anything that you want to be submitted in the proposal belongs in Section 3. Section 2, things for you to remember. Don't be overly restrictive in your service specifications. When you restrict how services are done, your solicitation becomes less and less competitive. Also, don't underspecify because being vague creates uncertainty, which leads to applicants trying to guess what it is that you want, and the result drives up costs more than it should be or more than you want it to be. The text should be clear, simple language, free of vague terms or those subject to variation in interpretation. If you're going to use abbreviations and acronyms, be sure to spell out the word fully the first time so there's no guessing as to what it stands for. Example, Department of Health, DOH. Just because you know what it means, don't assume that everybody else does too. Also, unless it doesn't matter to you one way or another, don't use the words desired or preferred because then if the applicant doesn't have it in the proposal, you can't mark them down on it because it's a want, not a need. Section 2 is unique to your services. You see a lot of red in this section because your agency needs to establish the services specific to the services you're soliciting. There are 5 subsections to Section 2. 2.1. The introduction includes the overview, purpose, or need of the services. It also includes a brief summary of planning activities, such as the request for information that you did. The introduction also provides your agency's service goals, the target population who you're providing the services for, the geographic locations of the services, and the funding amount. 2.2 is general information on contract monitoring and evaluation by the state. For each of the items listed under 2.2, it's a good idea to elaborate under each item how the state plans to monitor and evaluate performance of the contract. Next is Section 2.3, General Requirements. First, you will need to complete the provider qualification requirements. This is the organization qualifications, not the personnel or staff. Personnel qualifications are in another area. Secondary purchases are covered under HAR Section 3-143-608. There are 2 types of secondary purchases, after the fact and planned. Secondary purchases occur when 2 or more purchasing agencies have the same service requirements. The secondary purchases share shall not exceed 30% or $75,000, whichever is lesser, unless the secondary purchaser determines in writing that a good cause exists for a greater share. A planned secondary purchase occurs when the service requirements are combined and one RFP is issued, keeping in mind the dollar limits of the secondary purchaser. In the case that a purchasing agency competitively procures for services and somewhere during the life of the contract, another purchasing agency wants to utilize part of the services that has already been procured, but for 30% or $75,000, whichever is lesser, then the head of the purchasing agency or the procurement officer of the secondary purchaser shall obtain written approval from the primary purchaser's chief procurement officer. Upon the CPO's approval, the secondary purchaser would execute their own contract with the service provider. For multiple or alternate proposals, you need to check the appropriate box as to whether or not multiple or alternate proposals is allowed. You also need to indicate whether single or multiple contracts will be awarded. No matter whether you choose single, multiple, or single and multiple awards, you need to provide an explanation on what basis the awards will be made. As I said before, don't let it be a guessing game for the providers. A single award is self-explanatory. Example of multiple awards could be by islands, geographic areas, target population, or even by services. Single and multiple awards could be that you want to make a single award, but if that's not possible, then the plan is to make multiple awards. Or a single award for a particular type of service and multiple awards for other services, or single award for Maui, Hawaii, and Kauai, and multiple awards on Oahu. Whether it be single, multiple, or single and multiple, provide an explanation that there is so that there is no misunderstanding about how the awards will be divvied up. Next is awarding of single or multi-term contracts. Will the contract be for 2 years or less, or for more than 2 years? So that there's no misunderstanding of what you mean, please explain the contract terms. The guidelines in red provide ideas on what you should be including in your explanation. The heart of your service requirements is the next section, 2.4, Scope of Work. Under service activities, you'll be stating the minimum and/or mandatory tasks and responsibilities of the provider and the responsibilities of the state. Next are the management requirements. State the minimum and/or mandatory requirements of the provider's personnel and administration. State expectations of the provider as far as quality assurance and evaluation of the provided services, and also output performance and outcome measurements. You also need to specify the type and number of years experience you require of the provider. Remember that if you state that if you prefer a particular kind of experience, you will not be able to deduct evaluation criteria because they don't have it. Prefer means that it's nice to have, but it's not a requirement. Next, do you need your provider to coordinate services with any other public or private agencies? If yes, provide information about who and in what way services need to be coordinated. If no coordination of services is required, put not applicable. Next, do you need for the provider to provide reports? What kind and how often? Is your agency providing forms, or is there a specific format that needs to be followed? Lastly, in the management requirements section, are there facility requirements? Does the provider have to provide the facilities? If so, describe the requirements. Remember, the more restrictive your service specifications are, the less competition you'll get. On the other hand, if your specifications are loosey-goosey, in other words, too relaxed, then you again can expect many questions, a number of issued addenda, fewer proposals than you anticipated, or proposals with a wide range of interpretations that you didn't expect. The next section, 2.5, is on compensation and method of payment. What kind of pricing structure will this contract have? Would it be a cost reimbursement contract, unit price, fixed price, or some other form of payment? Whatever the pricing structure is, be sure that you explain what it is and how invoicing and payments are to be made and under what conditions. If you anticipate that there will be startup costs or advance payments, it must be addressed in the RFP. Otherwise, it can't be allowed. Okay, let's move on to section 3 of the RFP template. To develop this section, you will need to refer back to what you wrote in section 2 and how you want the applicant to address each part in the proposal. Section 3 is divided into 6 sections. 1. Program overview. 2. Experience and capability, which includes necessary skills, quality assurance and evaluation, coordination of services, and facilities. 3. Project organization and staffing. 4. Service delivery. 5. Financial. And 6. Other. Section 3 is where you explain to the prospective applicant what should be submitted in their proposal. Just as clarification, we refer to provider as the one that has been awarded a contract. An applicant is the one submitting a proposal. Section 2 is all about the provider. Section 3 is all about the applicant. And that's why on this slide, applicant is capitalized and bolded. Don't make the prospective applicant search throughout the RFP to ensure that they have addressed all that needs to be in the proposal. So how do you write up Section 3? Well, review what you wrote in Section 2 about what you want the provider to do. For each part of Section 2, state in Section 3 what it is that you want the applicant to address in the proposal. The RFP template is just that. It's a template. Section 3 is not meant for you to leave it like it is. It's too general. You need to make it your own. For each part of Section 3, you need to expand on what you want included in the proposal based on what is written in the related part in Section 2. When you see that there are no guidelines in red, it doesn't mean that you can leave the part like it is. What is in the template is a general statement. Make it relevant to your procurement. When you're expanding on a section, telling the prospective applicant what you want to be included in the proposal, avoid phrasing things like, applicant shall provide 3 hours per week of group counseling. When you do that, the applicant would just parrot back, we shall provide 3 hours per week of group counseling. Is that all that you wanted to know? So to avoid receiving parroted language, tell them to describe or explain the who, what, when, where, why, and how of whatever it is that you want to know. In Section 2, you might write, provider shall provide a minimum of 3 hours per week of group counseling. So based on what you wrote in Section 2, in Section 3 you might write, applicant shall describe the number of group counseling hours per week that applicant will provide, describing what each counseling session will entail and how it shall be incorporated into the weekly program. See, in that way you get the information that you need to know to effectively evaluate what the applicant has to offer in the way of services. For the financial section, don't require budget forms unless you have a purpose for them. If you're asking for budget forms just because it's good to know, then you shouldn't be requiring it. It does take a lot of time on the part of the applicant to prepare the budget form. So if you don't need it, don't ask for it. Now let's look at Section 4, Proposal Evaluation. Section 4 is where prospective applicants are informed on how their submitted proposal will be evaluated. There is a brief introduction. Following that is an explanation about the evaluation process and the possible points for each section of the proposal. Then we have the evaluation criteria, which is the meat of this section. There are 5 areas: program overview, experience and capability, project organization and staffing, service delivery, and financial, like how it's formatted in Section 3. Note, be sure that for each of the criterion that you established in Section 4, you mentioned it in Section 2 as a provider responsibility and in Section 3 as a proposal requirement from the applicant. If you asked for information but didn't establish a criteria for it, then you can't evaluate it. Similarly, if you established a criteria but didn't ask for it in Section 3, then an evaluation can't be done for that criterion. Mandatory requirements. In Phase 1 of the evaluation criteria, if the services require a license, pursuant to HRS Section 103F 401.5, no proposal can be accepted by the applicant who lacks the necessary license. Accreditations, certifications are not considered licenses. Anytime you make an accreditation, certification, or the like mandatory at the time of proposal submittal deadline, then if the applicant does not have it at the time of proposal submittal deadline, then the proposal fails to meet the mandatory requirement and is rejected. If by statute or rule a requirement can be met prior to award, then you are to allow the applicant to be in compliance prior to your awarding a contract. An example is the tax clearance. HRS Section 103-53 makes a tax clearance a prerequisite to entering into a contract. Therefore, if you require the applicant to be tax compliant at the time of proposal submittal deadline and the applicant is not or fails to provide the compliance verification with the proposal, you cannot reject the proposal in phase 1 of the evaluation process. Once you know what services you need and have established the responsibilities and requirements of the provider in Section 2, make a list of the most important aspects of the services, including cost. Be sure that you have requested the information from the applicants in Section 3 and then establish the criteria in Section 4. Assign points to each criterion based on their relative importance and include it in the proposal. The criteria which you see in the template are of a general nature and should be expanded on. Make the criteria specific to your procurement. Add sub-items. A word of caution. If you only assign points to the major categories, such as necessary skills and experience, and not to the sub-criteria, then each of the sub-criteria are weighted equally. For example, the category of experience and capability is assigned 20 overall points. If you don't assign sub-points to each of the subcategories, necessary skills, experience, quality assurance, and evaluation, coordination of services and facilities, then all of the sub-points are weighted equally. 20 points divided by 5 sub-criteria equals 4 points per sub-criteria. Whatever system you use for evaluating proposals, be sure that you fully explain how the final scoring will be determined. Here are some helpful hints to developing evaluation criteria. Think about evaluation criteria as you develop the service specification. When you identify the requirements and responsibilities of the provider in Section 2, think about how you want the applicant to address or provide in the proposal for each requirement and responsibility in Section 3. Then establish the criteria that will evaluate the proposal response. After you have all the evaluation criteria established, then you can work on their relative importance and possible scores. When establishing criteria or before finalizing the RFP, it would be a good idea to include the evaluators since they will be the ones to evaluate the proposals. They may have some great feedback. Remember, if you requested in Section 3 for applicants to provide information but fail to establish the criteria for it, then criteria not specified in the RFP shall not be used for evaluating proposals. Vice versa, if you establish a criteria but fail to request the information in Section 2, then the criteria shall not be used. So be very careful. Cross-check to see that each important service aspect is covered in all 3 sections. So here is an example of how sections 2, 3, and 4 build upon each other. In the first example, in Section 1, the agency indicates that the provider shall provide outreach services to at-risk youth, both in and out of school, in order to get those in need into substance abuse treatment. In Section 3, looking at what was stated in Section 2, what is it that you want the applicant to provide in the proposal? So in this example, the agency wants the applicant to describe in detail outreach activities that will be conducted in the community. The agency also wants the applicant to indicate in detail how outreach workers will be able to connect with youth. It also says to describe examples of location, times of day, etc., and to be specific. For example, if services will be conducted in parks, name the parks, will it occur in the mornings or weekends? See how the agency uses the words describe and detail. In that way, the applicant cannot just repeat that they do provide the required outreach services. Looking at what you have written in sections 2 and 3, you need to establish an evaluation criterion. In this example, in section 4, the agency wanted to know if the proposal described in detail outreach activities that will be conducted in the community, indicating in detail how outreach workers will connect with youth. 10 points was assigned to this criterion. If you look at the second example, it runs along the same line as the first. 1, what is it that you want the provider to do? 2, and how do you want the applicant to address it in the proposal? And 3, then establish the evaluation criterion for what you asked for the applicant to provide in the proposal. Now, hopefully, you have a good idea of how the RFP is set up. To complete the RFP, let's look at Section 5, Attachments. In Section 5, there is the proposal application checklist, the sample table of contents, and any other attachments that are specific to your RFP. The proposal application checklist is helpful for both the purchasing agency and the applicant. Both can see at a quick glance all that needs to be submitted together in the proposal. Only check those items that are relevant to your procurement. Add program-specific requirements, and don't forget to include the document as an attachment, or be sure to provide information as to where the document can be obtained. Just as an FYI, if the applicant does not provide the proposal application checklist with the proposal, it's not grounds to reject the proposal. Okay, we're done covering all parts of the request for proposals template. Now let's look at things that are important to know when you're working on your RFP. First is the RFP public notice requirement, which is covered in HAR Section 3-143-202. The notice of the RFP is required to be posted onto the Internet for a minimum of 28 days from the date the RFP is first available. For the executive branch, the notice shall be posted onto the State Procurement Office's Procurement Notices website. If you would like to put the notice into the newspapers, it's at your option. If you do put the notice in the newspaper, there is an SPO price list for newspaper publications. Go to SPO homepage and click on Price and Vendor List Contracts. When you post your public notice on the Internet, be sure to print the notice and complete the attestation Form SPO 20 on the release date of the RFP. In addition to posting the public notice for 103F procurement, you are required to post your RFPs and all related addenda onto the Request for Proposals website at the same time that you post the public notice. Refer to Procurement Circular Number 2004-04. The RFP website posting guidelines are located on the SPO website, hawaii.gov/SPO. This slide shows how to get to the posting guidelines. Pursuant to HAR Section 3-143-203, an orientation meeting is required when an RFP is issued. Be prepared for the meeting and have at least one other person attend the meeting with you. You know, it's difficult to conduct a meeting and take notes at the same time. Also, it's hard to remember all the questions and discussions that goes on. So it's recommended that you have someone else there to take notes and be the second pair of ears. It's also a good idea to establish an agenda. You can find a sample agenda on the SPO website. At the SPO homepage, spo.hawaii.gov, search keywords Forms and Templates. Click on the Forms and Templates listing to get you to where you want to go. In a snapshot, the suggestions of agenda topics that you want to cover are purpose of this RFP, purpose of this orientation, timeline, overview of the RFP, questions and answers, and how to submit written questions. Any substantive matters and responses to questions raised at the orientation shall be issued by addendum. It's also a good idea for you to furnish writing material, paper, or index cards so attendees can write down their questions. That way you have the questions at hand if you need to address it in the addendum. Otherwise, let the attendees know that they should also submit the questions asked in writing. By email is okay. Addenda is covered under HAR Section 3-143-301. Any amendments, corrections, and clarification to the RFP shall be made by an addendum. There's nothing wrong with issuing addenda. Changes do happen. You can find a sample of an addendum on the SPO website. Search keywords, forms, and templates. This is a sample addendum that may be used for issuing various types of addenda to RFPs for Health and Human Services under HRS Chapter 103F. Addenda issued prior to proposal submittal deadline shall be done at least 10 working days before the submittal deadline. If time does not allow for the 10 working days, then the addendum shall also extend the submittal deadline accordingly. Final revised proposals is covered under HAR Section 3-143-607. The request to submit final revised proposals shall be done by way of an addendum rather than a notice. These are things that need to be included in the addendum for final revised proposals. 1. The addendum is a request for final revised proposals. 2. The deadline for submission. 3. The procedure for submitting final revised proposals if different from submitting the original proposals. 4. Instructions that only the section or sections of the applicant's proposal that are being amended should be submitted. And 5. A statement that if an applicant does not submit a final revised proposal, then the last proposal shall be considered to be the applicant's final revised proposal. For final revised proposals, the rules require that the addendum be distributed at least 5 working days prior to the final revised proposal submittal deadline. So when are procurement documents open for public disclosure? In accordance with HAR Section 3-143-616, the procurement file shall be available for public inspection to the extent permitted under current law governing information practices after execution of a contract by all parties. Included in the procurement file should be all records that the purchasing agency keeps related to the procurement, award, or servicing of a contract. Now let's talk about applications for federal funding, which is covered under the competitive method of procurement in HAR Section 3-143-614. Applying for federal funds does not exempt a purchasing agency from HRS Chapter 103F. If a provider is not specified by federal law or in the federal grant award to the state, services shall be competitively procured. When applying for a federal grant, if the grant application requires identification of a specific provider or providers, then the purchasing agency may utilize the RFI HAR Section 3-142-202 to select a provider or providers. If you need a refresher on the RFI process for federal grant applications, please refer back to the on-demand workshop SPO 205 on planning using requests for information and collaboration for health and human services. During the 2010 legislative session, Act 69 was passed and HRS Section 103F 401.5 proposals and awards came into being. The statute requires that if an RFP requires a license or licenses, then the applicant's proposal cannot be accepted if the mandatory requirement is not met by the proposal submittal deadline. The statute also requires that all costs shall be included in the proposal to make an award. HRS Section 103F 203, Participation of Providers, was amended by Act 004 during the 2012 legislative session. It allows a purchasing agency to require a provider to participate in planning, provided that the requirement is in the RFP and the contract. Refer to Procurement Circular Number 2012-06 for a little more information. Procurement circulars can be found on the SPO website, spo.hawaii.gov. On the home page, click on the References tab at the top of the page. It is recommended that you watch the on-demand workshop number SPO 001 Procurement Basics. It'll take all of 16 minutes of your time. The workshop touches on the topics such as procurement delegation, training, HRS Chapter 103-55, Hawaii Compliance Express, public disclosure, record retention, and the Americans with Disabilities Act compliance. Here are some other on-demand workshops which you'll find very informative and helpful to your procurement. SPO 128 provides a little more information on Hawaii Compliance Express, and SPO 150 will provide you with a better understanding of the insurance and certificate of insurance requirements. When you are planning and developing your RFP, there are numerous resources for you to tap. This was covered in another workshop, but it's always good to go over it again, just in case you forgot. Many of our state agencies procure similar services, so network with each other. Also, check out the procurement notices and also the awards contract database and the RFP website. You have your departmental coordinators who are listed on the next page. And also, you'll always find a wealth of information on the internet. And here are your departmental coordinators for purchases of health and human services. So anticipate spending time to plan and develop your RFP. Remember, as Maya Angelou said, nothing will work until you do. And that brings us to the end of workshop number SPO 215. If you have any questions regarding what was covered in this session, please call or email me, Corinne Higa, at the phone number and email address shown on this page. Thank you very much for attending.